Many of you who are following the news right now see a shift in what's happening with this virus. And from the beginning, you can tell by my past videos that I have not been one to be fearing the virus. And it's because of my philosophy of really where health is built. And right now, and just even last night on the major news channels, they're looking at the death rates just sinking around the virus, saying, okay, it's probably more like 0.1% at best, which is basically the same as the regular flu. But however, because they're attributing many different conditions to corona, that it's probably even half that. So the bottom line is this, is the experts have missed it. Now, I'm not being critical here because this is a virus that was an unknown, and therefore they put things into place not understanding the risks that were at place. And now we know that it was a narrow group of people who were truly at risk for this virus. All right, so here we are. I think we have a greater risk even with what's happening in our economy. That's another topic. But I want to talk to you about something that is really just being pressed into my heart, is a true risk of what we're calling the new normal. So people with masks and gloves. Look, I want to be clear. If I was going into a group of people that was at great risk, I would wear a mask for sure. However, I'm not wearing one now. The shift right now is trending towards, now experts are saying, what do we do now? Because people want to get the antibodies. They're realizing that it's not as deadly as we thought, and they want to have the antibodies. And they're right in this thinking, because if this thing mutates in next year and for the next 2 years after this, we're going to deal with perhaps a more deadly strain that puts all of us at risk. And if the people that have the antibodies arguably would be at less risk. Now look, there's so much controversy around this, right? As far as how viruses mutate, what type of immunity do you have against the mutated virus? I can say this, that typically you have some better immunity. And obviously, so there's an argument for that. But okay, back up. I believe that the greater risk is this new normal because of science in the last decade has been amazing on the microbiome. Now, I did a video on how hand sanitizer are destroying the microbiome, and this microbiome on our skin, what we're exposed to in our mucous membranes, affects our microbiome in our gut. Ultimately, one of the things we've learned over the last decade is that this microbiome in our gut, on our skin, is really our immunity. Yeah, so you can even watch yogurt commercials. 70% to 80% of your immunity starts in your gut and your microbiome. So before this, we had the hygiene theory, which was basically run from bacteria, kill all bacteria. Right after World War II, antibiotics were just the cure of everything, and we learned that we created more disease. We learned that it wasn't about killing bacteria, viruses, or funguses, or pathogens. It was about living with them. So the last 10 years have showed us how important it is to be exposed to bacteria, viruses, and funguses, right? So now, do we want to be exposed to something extremely deadly, like some of these past viruses? The answer is no. But ultimately, when you start wearing masks and gloves, which could be the new normal, or not hugging, not handshaking, now we're not being exposed to things that we need to be exposed to build healthy immunity. So I just dug around. I wanted to find the original Scientific American. They talked about in this article, this was 10 years ago, and it was one of the first ones that I read, that showed the studies on having literally 10 times the amount of bacteria than we do cells in our body, and how these bacteria actually regulate our immune system and even control us being autoimmune. Because certain bacteria in our gut actually make certain cells called Treg cells. These are the cells that calm down your immunity so you don't go hyperimmunity. And they were saying basically that this is why we have so much autoimmune, food sensitivities, and allergies, because it's a microbiome problem. And they identify the different microbes in the gut, on the hands, etc., that are responsible for this type of immunity. So, that was the first article. And then I found this one in Scientific American from 2015. And I'll just read one excerpt from it. It was a great article proving my point, but they were talking about many different studies in the article. So in this particular one, a number of studies over the years have linked having fewer sanitary amenities in childhood with a lower risk of inflammatory bowel disease. So what these studies are showing, and they've cited them here, showing that kids who were exposed to more bacteria growing up actually had lower inflammatory gut diseases, basically less autoimmune diseases. And they go on to talk about basically the more you're exposed to bacteria, viruses, and different pathogens, basically the less chronic inflammation you have later in life. So it goes on to talk about a 2014 study, a Denmark study, showing that growing up on a farm with livestock exposes you to many different microbes, an enriched environment of microbes, and it have the risk of being stricken by inflammatory bowel disease as an adult. I mean, it goes on and on. But the whole point of this in these other studies is the more bacteria, viruses, fungus, and pathogens we're exposed to, the stronger immune system we have. Pretty amazing. Where does the microbiome start? It starts on our hands. It starts in these mucous membranes in our gut, and that really is what our immune system is about. So the new normal of avoidance. And actually, Daniel, I read you one of the first parts about that study. Daniel's holding the camera, and it talked about they raised mice in sterile environments. And what happened to the mice was devastating. It affected their heart, their lungs, which predisposed them to more viruses. So these were, again, mice raised in sterile environments actually had weaker immune system, ended up with more autoimmune, and ended up with more diseases in general. The bottom line is we're doing this again. The hygiene philosophy failed. The antibiotic era, hand sanitizers, all of it failed. In the last decade, all of this science driving us away from that. Now here we are. We're about to throw it all away because of fear and drive into another time. Who knows how long it'll last, where we're running from bacteria, viruses, funguses. That's not the answer. The key is living with them. So what do you do now, right? If you're around someone who is truly at risk, obviously avoidance, wear the mask, do what you have to do, right? So it's not my point. My point is that the new normal can't be doing this all the time. You need to expose yourselves to dirt. You need to expose yourselves to different bacteria. Hand sanitizers, big negative. Spraying everything in your house, trying to make your house sterile, big negative. Remember, kids who grow up on farms, better immune systems later. So we can't be sanitizing our environments. This, my friends, is going to go on and on in people's lives. They're going to continue this whole pattern that they've learned during this time. That's my fear. And we're going to end up with more generations of more autoimmune disease, more cancer, more inflammatory conditions, more bowel disease. So the point is if you truly want to build your immune system, you have to be exposed to these things. Avoidance is not the answer. We've learned this from the past. Let's not throw a whole decade of this research out the window, really. So the point is that there's a time and a place, but life cannot look like this. We need to be exposed. That's the key. Spread the message, share the video. People need to realize this. They need the message so we don't function in fear. The opposite, live with the pathogens.